The morning sun crawled lazily over the rooftops of Alder Grove, painting the narrow streets in a soft amber hue. The scent of dew and damp soil lingered in the air, mingling with the distant promise of vanilla frosting. Inside a modest brick home at the end of the Sycamore Lane, the Carter family stirred to life. It was Emily's 6th birthday. The living room was already festooned with streamers in shades of lilac and gold, a balloon arch guarding the doorway like a rainbow gate. The kitchen counters were stacked with the disposable plates, little pink forks, and a box labeled Emily's Cake, written in her father's handwriting. Today was supposed to be magical, but beneath the cheerful surface a current of unease flowed, subtle yet persistent, like a hairline crack running beneath the paint. Meredith Carter stood by the window, her hand pressed against the glass. Her eyes, lined with the weight of sleepless nights, traced the outline of her daughter's form in the backyard. Emily spun in circles near the garden patch, her laughter a melodic chime in the crisp morning air. The girl wore a white dress with sunflower prints and a paper crown slightly askew on her head. Meredith smiled, but it faltered. She glanced toward the oak tree in the corner of the yard, a tree that had grown from a sapling planted the day Emily was born. She remembered how the roots seemed to dig deeper than they should, how animals avoided it, how Emily had once said it hummed at night when the wind blew a certain way. That oak, gnarled and lopsided, had become a silent sentinel over her daughter's short life. Still, today was not a day for strange thoughts. Today was about cake and candles and presents wrapped in glittery paper. In the kitchen, Thomas Carter adjusted the cake's icing with the careful precision of a man who feared imperfection. He was a structural engineer by trade, but today he was just Dad. The cake was simple vanilla with buttercream roses, and it sat inside its clear box like a prized jewel. The oven still radiated warmth from the early morning baking, filling the house with the comforting smells. Thomas hummed softly to himself as he lifted the box and placed it in the fridge. He never noticed the flicker of the kitchen light. Just once. A blink, as if the bulb hesitated. When he looked up, the light burned steady again, just a loose wire, he reasoned. Or maybe the fridge drawing too much power. Nothing unusual, nothing that should have made the hair rise on the back of his neck. Guests arrived just after noon. Emily's cousins spilled into the backyard, their shrieks and laughter weaving through the air. Adults clustered near the patio table, sipping lemonade and catching up on the week's events. The party swelled with the rhythm of small-town celebration where everyone knew everyone and no one ever locked their doors. Emily moved among her guests with the grace of a storybook princess, waving her wand, accepting hugs and homemade cards. A magician was scheduled to arrive at 2. A clown had canceled last minute, but Meredith secretly saw that as a blessing. The oak tree cast a long shadow across the grass, one that didn't quite match the position of the sun. No one noticed. Not yet. It was 1:54 when Meredith realized she hadn't seen Emily for several minutes. At first, she assumed the girl had gone inside to use the bathroom or sneak a peek at her gifts. The guests were still cheerful, unaware of the ripple that had passed through the hostess's thoughts. Meredith slipped through the crowd and entered the house, her voice light as she called out for Emily. No answer. She moved through the hallway, checked the bathroom, the guest room, even the pantry. Nothing. Her calm began to fray. She returned to the backyard and asked the nearest child if they'd seen Emily. They hadn't. That's when the quiet worry took root. At 2:07, panic blossomed. The magician arrived to find the party hosts shouting Emily's name. The guests searched the neighborhood, the surrounding streets, even the small creek that bordered the woods behind the house. Thomas called the police. The cake was still in the fridge untouched. A knife lay beside it, still clean. The candles Meredith had placed earlier were now oddly missing from the kitchen drawer. The drawer itself was half open, as if someone had reached in gently with purpose. By 3:30, the party had ended, and the Carters' home was no longer a place of celebration. It became a staging ground. Police cars lined the curb. Officers moved with practiced efficiency, though even they admitted this was different. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no clues. Emily had simply vanished. Her paper crown was found at the base of the oak tree, resting among the roots as though placed there. The tree's bark felt cold to the touch despite the afternoon heat. A dog from the search team refused to approach it, instead barking furiously and backing away. As dusk fell, the balloons deflated slowly and the streamers sagged. The cake was removed from the fridge for examination. What no one could explain was how it remained perfectly fresh, its surface still cool, even after hours without refrigeration. Forensics found nothing unusual, but Meredith noticed something. One of the roses was missing. Not cut, not smudged. Gone, as if someone had plucked it cleanly with invisible hands. The story that began that day would grip Alder Grove for years to come. Rumors would spread. Theories would twist themselves into knots, but none of that mattered to the Carters that first night. Meredith sat by the window long after everyone had left her hand once more against the glass. The wind picked up, and through the night air she thought she heard humming, faint, like a melody carried from deep beneath the earth. A birthday song sung for no one, or maybe for someone just out of reach. And in the dark, the candle that never got lit still waited. Somewhere. The second morning arrived without rest. The house stood still, muffled under a silence that pressed against the walls like fog. Meredith wandered the living room barefoot, her fingers brushing the corners of furniture as if searching for balance. The scent of buttercream lingered faintly, growing stale with each hour. The living room remained frozen in time streamers, half-fallen, plastic cups, half-full napkins scattered like leaves in a storm. Thomas had taken to sitting at the kitchen table, elbows pressed into the surface, his eyes locked on the hallway like he expected Emily to walk through it at any moment. The door to the fridge remained open longer than necessary each time someone passed it. They both kept looking at the cake, hoping it would somehow give them something back. When the police returned that afternoon, they brought dogs and more officers with clipboards and cameras. One officer asked to see Emily's bedroom. Meredith led him up the stairs, her movements stiff and mechanical. The bedroom door creaked open and revealed a neatly kept room shelves filled with fairy tale books and dolls seated on a small bench by the window. A music box sat on the dresser, its lid half open. Inside was a ballerina, frozen mid-spin, her delicate arm stretched upward. The officer glanced at the box but did not touch it. He asked Meredith when Emily had last used it. Meredith shook her head and said it had not played in weeks. He wrote something down and turned to leave, but not before noticing the small drawing taped beside the closet. A crayon sketch of a tree with a hollow center, and inside it a stick figure with yellow hair. Outside, the oak tree had become a point of interest. A few neighbors gathered beyond the yellow tape, whispering in tight knots. Some of them remembered strange things. A woman in her 60s recalled a boy who vanished 40 years ago. He had been playing hide-and-seek. They found his jacket near a tree, but never found him. A man who had lived in the neighborhood for decades mentioned how animals always avoided the Carters' oak. He called it hollow earth. No one took him seriously until he pointed to the roots. One of the officers stepped closer and noticed the ground beneath the tree was unnaturally soft. When they brought out the ground-penetrating radar, they found something beneath. Not a body, not a tunnel, just a cavity, a perfect circle that did not align with the roots. That evening, Thomas decided to go into the attic. He claimed it was to look for old photos, maybe something to remind people what Emily had looked like before the posters arrived. But part of him wanted something else. A connection. A clue. He climbed the ladder and stepped into the dust-covered space above the hallway. Boxes lined the beams, most labeled with dates or holidays. He opened one marked Spring Cleaning and found a stack of drawings. They were Emily's. He remembered placing them there a year ago when they ran out of space on the fridge. As he flipped through them, one page caught his eye. It was another tree. This time, the tree had eyes. One on each side of its trunk, wide and staring. Below them, a small hand reaching out. The hand was not attached to anything. It just floated there, palm open. He took the picture and descended quietly. The next morning, something changed. Meredith stood in front of the fridge again. The cake had not spoiled, not a smudge, not a hint of age, but the missing rose had returned. It was there, pale pink and perfect, exactly where it had been when she iced it. Her breath caught in her throat. She called Thomas. He came quickly. They both stared at the cake for a long time before opening the lid. The air inside was cold. Not cool, cold. Much colder than a fridge should be. Thomas fetched a thermometer. When he placed it inside the box, it read 34 degrees. Then it dipped. 32, then 30. Thomas pulled it out. They checked the fridge itself. It read 41, normal. Meredith shut the box. She told Thomas she no longer wanted the cake in the house. They placed it in the garage freezer. Hours later, Thomas returned and checked on it. The box remained sealed, but the freezer's light flickered. Not just a flicker. It stayed dark for a second, then snapped back. He opened the lid. The cake was gone. In its place was a different object, a photo frame. Inside it, a picture neither of them remembered taking. It showed the backyard empty but for the oak tree. At the base of the tree sat Emily, her back to the camera crown, slightly askew, looking up at something just out of frame. The police took the photo for analysis. No digital alterations, no tricks. It had been printed on paper from a local drugstore chain. Date stamp on the back confirmed it was processed the day before Emily's birthday. Meredith insisted they had never taken such a photo. She would have remembered. She would have kept it in an album. That night, she burned the rest of the party decorations. She could not stand the sight of them. The air outside was heavy, the kind that sticks to your skin. Thomas stayed inside. He checked the attic again. This time he found nothing new. But when he came down, he noticed something strange. The drawing with the reaching hand was no longer in the folder. He found it downstairs, instead taped to the kitchen cabinet. On the 5th day after Emily vanished, Meredith woke just after midnight, drenched in sweat. The dream had been the same as the night before. She stood at the foot of the oak tree, the earth around it trembling like something breathed beneath the soil. In the dream, Emily stood not far away, her dress smudged with dirt, her expression blank. She never spoke. She only lifted her hand slowly and pointed toward the tree. Meredith had woken with the taste of soil in her mouth. She sat up and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The house was quiet, except for the soft tick of the hallway clock. She reached for her robe and made her way downstairs, unsure what she was looking for. In the kitchen, the drawing that had reappeared the day before was gone again. In its place was a clean sheet of white paper. On it, someone had scribbled a simple phrase in crayon. It read, "I hear her singing." Thomas slept through the night, his exhaustion finally winning over the anxiety that had plagued him for days. He woke to find Meredith standing barefoot in the backyard. Her hair was damp with morning mist, and she stared up into the limbs of the oak tree. The police had cordoned off the area around it, but she stood just beyond the tape, her eyes fixed on a hollow near the base. When Thomas called to her, she did not turn. Instead, she knelt slowly, pressed one hand to the earth, and whispered something he could not hear. After a long pause, she rose and walked past him without a word. Inside, she washed her hands thoroughly over and over, as if trying to remove something more than dirt. She did not speak until after breakfast, when she finally said it aloud. The tree is not right. Something is wrong underneath. Later that afternoon, a new officer arrived from the state unit. Her name was Alina Voss. She was soft-spoken but asked sharp questions, the kind that made people flinch. She reviewed the timeline, examined the backyard again, and spent an hour near the oak without speaking. When she returned to the living room, she placed a digital recorder on the coffee table and asked Meredith if she believed in sound memory. Meredith said she did not know. Alina explained that some materials, particularly organic ones, like trees, could absorb and retain vibrations for years. She said the oak might have captured sounds from the day Emily vanished. It was rare. It was not science everyone agreed on, but it was worth trying. That night, with Thomas and Meredith watching Alina set her equipment at the base of the tree and waited. The playback began with static. The usual hum of background noise filled the speakers. Then slowly, something else emerged. A soft rhythm, almost like humming. A child's voice, thin and high, carried a fragment of melody. It was barely audible. Just a line or two from Happy Birthday. Thomas reached for Meredith's hand, but she had already covered her mouth with both palms. The recording ended with a single word. It was not Emily's voice. It was lower, hoarser, and it said, "Come." Alina shut the recorder and looked at the Carters with an unreadable expression. She said they would try again the next night. The second recording session produced a different sound. No singing this time. Only breathing. It came in uneven gasps, followed by what sounded like footsteps circling the tree. The mic picked up no wind, no birds, nothing else, just movement. And then a thud, as if something heavy dropped behind the tree. When they went to look, there was nothing, but the bark on one side had split slightly, a thin line from root to branch. Alina marked it with tape and told them to let her know if it changed. Before she left that night, she said something strange. She said she had worked missing persons for 11 years, and she had never heard a tree breathe until Alder Grove. The town grew restless. Parents began keeping children indoors. Someone spray-painted witchwood on the Carters' mailbox. Another left a bag of salt at their doorstep. A neighbor across the street moved away entirely, citing too many sleepless nights. The town mayor called for a community meeting, but no one had answers, only theories. Most pointed to the tree. A few blamed the family. Rumors spun in circles like dry leaves. Some said Meredith had always been odd. Others claimed Thomas was too calm. The truth was less exciting. They were simply broken. Meredith stopped sleeping in their bedroom. She moved to the living room and took to watching the backyard through the window every night. One evening, just past 3 a.m, she saw something. A faint blue glow near the base of the oak. It flickered, hovered, then vanished. She rushed outside, barefoot again, robe flapping in the cold breeze. When she reached the tree, she found something half buried at its roots, a birthday candle. Burned, melted to its base. But it had not been there before. She brought it inside and placed it on the table beside the drawing of the tree. It seemed smaller than she remembered, or maybe her hands had just grown numb. That day, Thomas began digging. He ignored the tape, ignored the warnings. He fetched a shovel from the shed and returned to the oak. The earth was soft, too soft. With each scoop, the soil crumbled easily as if it wanted to be removed. He dug 2 feet down before the sound changed. A hollow thump like metal against wood. He cleared more dirt and found a wooden lid. He called for Alina. When she arrived, she examined it closely and determined it was not a coffin. It was a chest. Old, hand-carved, bound with iron clasps. They pried it open together. Inside the chest was a single object, a doll, cloth and buttons, blonde yarn hair, sunflower dress. It was Emily's. Meredith confirmed it. She had sewn it herself the year Emily turned 4, but it had gone missing 6 months ago, and they had assumed it was lost or discarded. Now it lay in the chest perfectly clean, untouched by mold or time. Underneath the doll was another drawing. Not done by crayon, but charcoal, the same tree. But this time its roots reached down and wrapped around a figure. A girl. Eyes closed, lips parted. Almost as if she were sleeping. The chest was removed under police supervision and taken to a temporary forensics lab set up in a van parked outside the Carters' home. Meredith watched from the window, arms crossed, shoulders tight. The doll and the charcoal drawing were sealed in clear evidence bags, but she could not look away. That was Emily's doll. Not a replica, not something similar. The stitching along the hem was her own work, crooked and imperfect. She remembered doing it in the early hours of a snowy morning, pricking her finger twice in the process. Alina promised to update them once the items were processed. For the rest of the day, Meredith avoided the backyard. She closed the curtains and played soft music in the living room, though the sound never masked the hum she had begun to hear. It was not in her ears. It was in the walls. Thomas turned to their home security system that night, combing through footage from the day before Emily's birthday. He hoped to find something, A shape, a person, a shadow. He sat for hours watching the same minutes loop over and over again. At 6:43 p.m. on the night before the party, the camera positioned over the back porch captured something strange. A flicker of motion just beyond the tree. At first glance it looked like a bird, but when he slowed it down frame by frame he saw the silhouette of a girl. She stood facing the tree, not moving. The image was too grainy to confirm anything, but the outline of her dress looked familiar. He paused the footage and called Meredith over. They stared at the frozen frame together. The girl had no shoes. Alina returned the next morning. Her expression had hardened. She informed them that the charcoal used in the drawing matched a sample of vine charcoal typically sold in an art shop 4 towns over. A receipt was found tucked into the base of the chest dated 6 weeks before Emily's disappearance. The handwriting on it belonged to a man named Leonard Dross, a reclusive artist who had once lived in Alder Grove but had disappeared nearly 20 years ago. His last known address had been less than 2 blocks from the Carters' home. When asked, none of the neighbors recalled him clearly. Some said he was quiet. Others said he used to paint strange things. All agreed he had vanished without a trace. With this new lead, Alina and another officer visited the abandoned house where Leonard Dross had once lived. It had been sold to a developer 5 years ago, but renovations stalled and the building remained untouched. Dust coated every surface. Old canvases leaned against the walls, their images faded or torn. In the basement, they found a locked cabinet embedded into the wall. It took 2 hours to force it open. Inside were rows of tapes. VHS unmarked. Alina brought them back to the station for examination. That night, she called Thomas and Meredith. She said they should come in and see something. The tape she played had no sound. The image was black and white, filmed from a high angle as if mounted in a corner of a room. The date in the corner flickered. March 11th. The time read 02:14 a.m. A girl stood in the center of the frame, her face turned upward toward the ceiling. Her eyes were wide open. Her mouth moved, but there was no sound. She wore a dress with sunflowers. She stood still for nearly 4 minutes, then slowly sat down, crossed her legs, and lowered her head. The tape ended there. Alina paused it on the girl's face. The resemblance was striking. She looked like Emily, only older. Meredith stared at the screen, her hands clenched in her lap. That was not possible. Emily had just turned 6, but the girl on the tape looked at least 10. Thomas leaned forward, studying the grain of the video. He asked if it could have been manipulated. Alina said nothing. Instead, she handed them a file containing timestamps and excerpts from 5 other tapes. Each one featured a different child. Each one vanished in Alder Grove. Each one was filmed in the same room. None of the children were ever found. The discovery unraveled something deep inside Meredith. She no longer trusted the daylight. She began recording the house herself, placing her phone on the windowsill and letting it run from sunset to sunrise. After the 3rd night, she found something. At 3:12 a.m., a figure passed across the kitchen doorway. No sound, no footsteps, just a flicker of motion. She showed it to Thomas. He agreed it was not a reflection or a shadow. That same night, the music box upstairs began to play on its own. A single tune, slowed and distorted Happy Birthday. The next morning, Thomas took a hammer and nails and boarded up the oak tree. He nailed planks across its hollow, sealing the opening. He sprinkled salt at the base, then poured a circle of vinegar. Meredith watched from the window. She said nothing. That afternoon, Emily's name appeared again, written in condensation on the bathroom mirror. Neither of them had used the shower in over a day. That night, Meredith burned the 2nd drawing, the one from the chest. She held it with tongs over the sink and lit a match. As it curled into ash, the kitchen light flickered violently, then went out. It did not return until morning. Alina called again on the 5th day after the discovery of the tapes. Her voice was strained. She told them to meet her at the station. She had something else. A tape they had overlooked. This one had no date. It began with static, then showed the same room, but darker. A camera panned slowly to the side and stopped on a table. On it sat the doll. Emily's doll. the one found in the chest. A hand entered the frame, not a child's hand. It was larger, paler, with long fingers. It reached out and stroked the doll's yarn hair once. Then the screen went black. The following day brought a heaviness that neither Thomas nor Meredith could shake. The air in the house had grown colder despite the warming weather outside. The heating system still functioned, but a persistent chill lingered near the walls and floorboards, as if the cold came from inside the structure rather than from beyond it. Meredith noticed frost on the inside of their bedroom window when she woke a thin sheet that melted as soon as she touched it. The ice had formed a shape resembling a ring, a near-perfect circle with no beginning or end. She wiped it away and found her own breath misting in front of her. The furnace kicked on again with a low rumble. The vent blew warm air, but the cold did not lift. Thomas spent the morning re-watching the tapes that Alina had provided. He paused on the final one, the one with the pale hand and the doll. He stared at the slow, deliberate motion of the fingers as they brushed the yarn hair, and he felt a twist in his gut. The skin looked wrong, almost waxy, too smooth. He wondered if it belonged to Leonard Dross, if the artist had filmed the tapes, if he had taken the children. But Leonard had disappeared 20 years ago, and the last tape was undated. There were no visible clues, no voices, no spoken names, only that hand, always that hand. Thomas shut off the screen and turned toward the window where the oak tree stood framed by gray light. Alina called that afternoon to inform them that she had reviewed the town's old property plans. She mentioned something strange. The Carters' home had once belonged to the original groundskeeper of Alder Grove Cemetery, back when the cemetery was located 2 streets over. The oak tree had stood at the border of the original cemetery grounds. It was never moved. The homes were simply built around it when the town expanded. Beneath the tree, according to blueprints, there had once been a root cellar sealed before the first Carter ever moved in. Alina suspected the chest had been stored there, buried at some point after the cellar had collapsed or been intentionally filled. She asked permission to bring a ground crew to investigate further. Thomas agreed. They began digging the next morning. 3 workers in reflective vests arrived before dawn with equipment and tools. They moved carefully around the oak, which now stood behind freshly nailed boards and warning tape. By mid-afternoon, the workers had uncovered a stone slab just under 4 feet below the surface. It bore no markings, but there were grooves along the sides that indicated it had once held hinges. After several hours of work, they lifted the slab and revealed a stairway descending into darkness. Alina stood at the edge with a flashlight in hand. She descended first. Meredith and Thomas followed. The stairs were damp and narrow. Moss lined the walls, and the air smelled of mildew and something older, something sour. At the base was a low room made of crumbling brick. The root cellar had long since collapsed in some places, leaving piles of debris and broken beams. Alina swept the flashlight across the walls until the beam caught on something that shimmered. There, etched into the back wall, were dozens of names, carved in uneven rows. Some were familiar. They matched the names of the missing. Beneath each was a date. Not the day they vanished, a different date. Thomas bent closer and realized what it was. Each name was followed by the same date, March 11th. Alina moved to the far corner of the cellar and found something covered by a sheet of plastic. When she pulled it back, they saw what lay beneath. Another chest, smaller than the first, sealed tightly with rusted clasps. She opened it slowly. Inside was a stack of drawings, each one done in charcoal, each showing the same tree. In some, the roots twisted like snakes. In others, the trunk split in 2, revealing a dark tunnel within. The last image showed the tree upside down, roots extending into a black sky, stars drawn like pinpricks across the page. Meredith stepped back and said nothing. That night, the humming returned. This time, it did not come from the walls. It came from under the floor. Thomas heard it in the hallway. Meredith heard it in the kitchen. It grew louder the closer they came to the stairs leading to the basement. When Thomas opened the door, the humming stopped. He stood in the silence for a moment, then closed it again. It resumed instantly. That same soft vibration, almost like singing without words. Meredith covered her ears and walked upstairs. The next morning they found soil on the living room rug. Just a dusting at first. By noon, it had gathered in a small pile. Alina returned to investigate. She tested the soil and confirmed it matched the composition from beneath the oak. No explanation was given for how it had entered the house. Thomas vacuumed it up, but it returned the following day. Meredith stopped touching it. She started stepping around it instead. She claimed she heard breathing when she got too close. The following week brought a new event. The front door opened on its own during the early hours of the morning. The alarm system had not triggered. The lock was still intact. The wind outside was mild. No storm, no explanation. When Thomas checked the footage from their security camera, the recording cut out at exactly 2:14 a.m. When it resumed, the door was open. Nothing was visible on the porch, but inside the entryway a trail of water led to the staircase. The water dried before sunrise. Alina called again with another update. A forensic team found a partial fingerprint on one of the charcoal drawings. It did not match any known suspect, but it did match a partial print found on a missing child's shoelace from a case 17 years earlier. That print had never been identified. Alina requested access to the original foundations of the old cemetery. Her tone had changed. She no longer spoke in long sentences. She kept her words clipped as if the weight of everything they uncovered pressed against her throat. That night, Meredith lit a candle in the living room. She placed it in the center of the rug where the soil had appeared. She sat cross-legged and waited. Thomas stood nearby watching. He did not stop her. At 2:14 a.m., the flame flickered violently, then steadied. The air grew thick and the hum began again. But this time it was clearer. It sounded like a voice. A child's voice, repeating the same line over and over again. I want to come home. By the following week, the soil on the rug had changed color. What began as light brown dust from the backyard darkened with each appearance. It now resembled the clay-rich earth found deeper underground, the kind soaked with moisture and time. Meredith no longer vacuumed it. She swept around it, letting the pile sit like a shrine. Thomas documented the changes, photographing the pattern of the soil each morning. On the 7th day, the dirt spelled something. Not clearly, not like letters formed by a child's hand, but it suggested a curved symbol. Meredith recognized it from one of the charcoal drawings. It was the same symbol carved into the trunk of the upside-down tree, the circle with a break at the bottom like an open mouth. Alina arrived again, this time with a digital archivist who specialized in decoding historical symbols and markings. The archivist examined the photos, the cellar drawings, and the soil patterns with cautious interest. She said the circle resembled an Old Norse rune once used to mark thresholds or boundaries between worlds. It symbolized entry and invitation. She warned that it was often paired with rites meant to open things that should stay closed. Meredith asked what could be opened. The archivist only said that sometimes places held memory, like bodies held scars. When that memory was disturbed, it tried to find a voice. That evening, Thomas retrieved the last VHS tape from the storage case. It had no label and was badly warped. The previous attempts to play it had failed, but now he had repaired the VCR and inserted it again. This time, the tape rolled. The footage was darker than the others filmed with a handheld camera. It opened in what appeared to be a basement. Not the same basement they had explored. This one was cleaner, neater, with concrete walls and a metal chair placed in the center. A cake sat on the floor nearby. The image trembled slightly as the camera approached the chair. On it sat a figure. A child. Back facing the camera. The birthday hat on her head was torn. She held something in her lap. A stuffed rabbit. The camera panned to the right and showed a wall lined with paper decorations. Balloons, streamers, the phrase, "Happy Birthday," hand-painted in red letters. The decorations looked damp and slightly faded as if they had been there a long time. The child never turned. She only swayed slightly as if humming. Then the camera dropped, suddenly tilted sideways. The image trembled and went black. The tape ended there. Meredith had sat down during the video, her legs folding slowly beneath her. She pressed her hand to her stomach and whispered that it was the same cake, the same one they had stored in the freezer, the one that had disappeared. She remembered the exact pattern of the roses. That night, the hallway outside their bedroom changed. The walls seemed longer than before. The light fixtures cast dimmer glows and the shadows pooled thicker at the baseboards. Meredith felt it first. She stepped into the hall to use the bathroom and noticed the door at the end of the hall. It had never been there before. It was a white wooden door with a brass knob similar to the others in the house, but cleaner, untouched. She stood frozen for a long moment before calling for Thomas. When he joined her, the door was gone. The hallway had returned to its original shape. Alina advised them to document everything and avoid interacting with any changes directly. She suggested staying with family temporarily. Meredith refused. She said Emily was still here. She said they could not leave until the house finished what it had started. Thomas did not argue. Instead, he set up night vision cameras in every hallway. That night, at 3:09 a.m., the footage caught the hallway stretching again. This time, the door appeared and stayed for exactly 7 minutes. No one opened it. But a soft sound came from within, a music box playing a slowed version of Happy Birthday. The next day, Meredith dreamed of the door. In her dream, she opened it. The inside was not a room. It was a tunnel made of stone and roots winding downward in a tight spiral. She walked barefoot, her feet brushing damp soil and splinters. At the bottom, she entered a room lit by candles. In the center sat Emily Alder, now wearing the same sunflower dress holding the same rabbit. Her face was still, her eyes were blank. When Meredith tried to speak, Emily raised a hand and pointed behind her. There, etched into the stone wall, was the open-mouthed symbol. The dream ended with the tunnel collapsing inward. That afternoon the house smelled different. A new scent had taken hold. Not rot, not mold, but sweetness. A sugary perfume that made the air feel heavier. It came from the vents even though the HVAC system had been turned off. The scent matched the cake, not the one from the party, the one from the tape. Thomas confirmed it. He said the frosting had a distinct artificial vanilla smell. He had noticed it when they first opened the box. Now, that same scent clung to the corners of every room. Meredith returned to the root cellar with Alina that evening. The air inside was colder than before. They brought a portable monitor and lowered a thermal camera into the darkest section of the collapsed area. The footage returned odd readings. A spot beneath the bricks registered at 41 degrees, unusually cold for a space without ventilation. The shape of the cold zone was nearly circular. Alina ordered a careful excavation. As they cleared the rubble, they uncovered another door. Wooden, arched, with no knob. Alina wanted to wait until morning. Meredith did not. She stepped forward and pressed her palm to the door. The wood was warm. She leaned in. From behind the door came a sound. Breathing. And a voice. It was not a whisper this time, it was clear. The voice said almost home. Then it stopped. They returned the next morning with more light, more tools, and more caution. The arched door at the bottom of the root cellar had remained unchanged overnight. No knob, no hinges. Just a smooth surface with the same open-mouthed symbol etched deep into the center. Alina brought in a structural specialist who tapped gently along the frame and confirmed that the door was not decorative. It led somewhere. The material was old oak dried and dense, likely original to the property. Despite no visible mechanism, it gave off a subtle vibration. Not a hum like before, a pulse. Faint but rhythmic, as if the door itself breathed slowly in its sleep. Meredith stood nearest to it, arms crossed, breath fogging slightly even in the stale air. She reached forward again, pressing her palm to the symbol. It felt different now. Warmer, softer at the center. She kept her hand there until Alina stepped forward and warned her not to engage without backup. But Meredith had already begun speaking softly, her voice low and slow, repeating her daughter's name as if in prayer. Emily, again and again. And for a moment the room responded. The walls shuddered with a faint creak. The air thickened. The door remained closed. That afternoon, they brought in a ground-penetrating radar unit. The scan revealed a void behind the door roughly the size of a small room. It sat low, about 5 feet deep and 10 feet wide, nestled between stone walls. No obvious way in or out. Alina took the data and sent it to her department. The official answer came back inconclusive. The structure was not recorded in any property plans or architectural revisions. No foundations had been laid in that shape. The room behind the door did not exist on paper. Thomas reviewed the blueprints again himself. Every time he tried to place the void on a physical map of the house, it moved slightly. The measurements shifted. The room seemed to hover in space without anchoring to anything solid. That evening, the door at the end of the hallway reappeared. Meredith woke first. She sat up in the dark and stared into the black gap of the open bedroom door. Across the hall, the new door stood wide open. Inside it, only darkness. No sound. No wind. But the smell of cake had returned. She woke Thomas with a whisper, and together they approached. The hallway had stretched again longer than the day before. The carpet beneath their feet crinkled faintly as if it had aged decades overnight. The door remained open, beckoning without force. When Thomas flicked on the hallway light, it buzzed and popped. The bulb burst with a dull flash and went dark. They stood there, unsure. Meredith reached the frame first and peered inside. What she saw did not match the house. The room beyond was not the attic or a guest bedroom. It was a party room. Streamers hung from the ceiling. A banner curved above the far wall reading Happy Sixth. A table in the center bore a pink cake perfectly round with 6 candles glowing. The room was completely silent, yet the candles flickered. Meredith blinked, and the room went black again. The door had closed. The hallway returned to its normal length. Thomas flipped the breaker and replaced the bulb. Nothing more happened that night. Alina returned the next day with a motion sensor and a digital voice recorder. She placed them both outside the root cellar door and instructed them to check the files each morning. If the door opened, the recorder would catch the sound. If the hallway door reappeared, the sensor near the stairs would light up. That night, both devices activated at the same time. The recorder picked up a soft dragging noise behind the arched door, like fabric across stone, and a single word: home. The motion sensor on the stairs recorded no footsteps, but triggered anyway, as if something without weight had passed. On the 8th night, Meredith began keeping a journal. Her entries were short-written in tight script, always beginning with the same sentence: "She is almost here." Thomas worried but did not challenge her. Instead, he joined Alina in watching the feeds from the house's cameras. One feed from the kitchen showed the cabinet doors opening slightly every morning at exactly 3:14 a.m. Always the same drawer, always the same slow movement. They placed a small bell inside. The next night it rang once, then fell silent. In the early hours of the 9th day, the hallway door opened and did not disappear. Meredith walked to it alone, eyes unfocused, hands loose at her sides. Inside the room now sat not one cake but 2, one fresh, one partially eaten. A small chair faced the table. On it sat Emily's doll, its yarn hair pulled to one side, eyes fixed on the unlit candles. Meredith reached forward and touched the back of the chair. The doll turned. Not by wind, not by touch. It rotated slowly until it faced her fully. Meredith stumbled back and the room vanished. She collapsed that morning and slept for 16 hours. Thomas watched over her, unwilling to sleep. Alina stayed as well, documenting every occurrence, every whisper, every sound that moved between the walls. The recorder picked up something new. A girl's voice, clearer now. It said, "I remember. I never left." Alina listened to it twice before setting the file aside. The soil returned to the rug at noon this time in the shape of a handprint. Small, childlike, palm down, as if someone had leaned from the floor and pressed into the fabric. On the 10th night since the arched door was uncovered, the cellar became colder than it had ever been. The floor glistened with moisture and the air pressed tightly against the skin, thick and heavy like wet cloth. Alina arrived at dusk with a thermal sensor and a backup team from her department. They installed additional lights and cameras around the entrance. Meredith stood nearby wrapped in a wool coat, eyes never leaving the door. She held her journal against her chest fingers, tapping gently against the spine. Thomas hovered near the base of the stairs, uncertain whether to come closer or keep watch from above. The house had grown too quiet again, as if sound itself had stepped outside. Alina spoke quietly with her partner, then turned to Meredith and asked what she saw when she touched the door. Meredith answered without hesitation. She said she saw a room beneath a birthday banner, a table with flickering candles, and a child who would not turn around. Alina nodded and placed a sensor directly on the symbol carved into the door. When she activated the monitor, the symbol glowed faintly just for a moment, and the monitor flashed briefly before going dark. They replaced the batteries, but it refused to power on again. That night, the hallway door appeared again, this time accompanied by a change in temperature. The entire upper floor dropped 5 degrees within seconds. Thomas felt at first the sudden bite of cold against his neck. He stood in the hallway watching frost form along the baseboard. Meredith approached from behind him, barefoot, unblinking. She stopped at the frame of the new door and stepped inside before Thomas could stop her. The air inside the room was thick, the scent of birthday cake overpowering. The candles on the table were lit. This time, Emily sat in the chair. She looked older, but only by a few years. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, her mouth neither smiling nor frowning. She did not speak. Meredith moved forward, knelt by the chair, and reached out. Her fingers brushed her daughter's hand, and for a moment the illusion seemed to break. Emily blinked slowly and whispered a word. Down. Then her image flickered and vanished. Meredith fell forward into the chair. The table disappeared. The cake remained perfectly shaped and glowing with unburned candles. Thomas stepped into the room and helped her to her feet. They left the cake behind. The hallway returned to normal by morning, but the frost remained. Meredith's journal now included drawings. Not of the tree, but of the chair, always empty, always facing away. The final page showed the cake alone on the table with candles drawn in black. She claimed Emily had pointed to the basement, that the voice behind the arched door now whispered names each night. Some names she did not recognize. Others she did. Thomas asked her if she felt Emily was alive. She said yes, but not like before. That afternoon, Alina returned with a crowbar and 2 additional agents. They had received approval to breach the arched door. Meredith did not protest. She sat quietly on the steps while they prepared the tools. The wood splintered on the second strike. A long creak echoed through the cellar as the door cracked inward. Behind it lay a stairwell descending further than the radar had suggested. The steps were narrow and uneven, made of mismatched stone. The air that escaped was not foul, but stale, as if it had not moved in years. They descended slowly. Alina led with a flashlight, Thomas followed, and Meredith came last. At the bottom of the stairs was a circular room. The walls were lined with symbols not painted but carved deep into the stone. A single chair stood in the center. A birthday hat rested on its seat. Against one wall stood a table, and on the table sat the original cake. The one that had vanished from their freezer. It looked untouched, perfectly preserved, its candles unlit. On the opposite wall hung framed drawings. Each one showed a version of the same party room, but in each image something changed. The number of candles, the size of the chair, the presence or absence of a child. Meredith stepped toward the wall and examined each drawing. The final frame depicted the current room exactly. The same table, the same cake, the same symbols. But in the chair sat Emily. Her expression was different this time. She smiled, but the smile was wrong. It did not reach her eyes. Thomas reached out and touched the edge of the frame. It was warm. Alina warned them not to interact further, but Meredith stepped to the chair and lifted the birthday hat. Underneath it lay a single note folded precisely. It read, "I wait." That night, the cellar door would not close. The air from the hidden room rose slowly into the house. The soil returned again to the living room floor, but this time it formed two handprints, one larger, one smaller. Alina collected the prints and took samples. Meredith did not sleep. She remained seated near the hallway waiting for the door to return. When it did, it opened silently. This time, no table stood inside, no cake, only a narrow hallway leading to darkness. Meredith stepped back and did not enter. The following morning arrived without light. The sky above Alder Grove remained a dull gray, the kind that swallowed sunrise and made noon feel like dusk. Inside the Carters' home, the temperature continued to drop. The furnace worked. The thermostat blinked the correct numbers. Yet the chill deepened. Every surface felt like stone. Even the floorboards, long warmed by foot traffic and summer air, now creaked beneath their weight like frozen timber. Meredith moved slowly from room to room, her steps silent, her gaze often distant. She no longer flinched at the whispers. She no longer questioned the shifts. She recorded everything in her journal, which had nearly doubled in thickness. Thomas kept a log of his own, less detailed but filled with timestamps, room temperatures, and door sightings. The hallway door had remained open for 3 nights now. Its frame pulsed faintly in the dark. Alina returned just after midday, accompanied by a linguist from the university. The carvings in the stone room had caught her attention, and she believed they could be interpreted. The linguist, a quiet man named Rylan, examined the walls with a focused intensity. He sketched each marking, took photos, and then requested a moment alone in the space. Thomas and Alina agreed. Meredith remained upstairs, staring at the living room rug, now marked by 3 distinct handprints. One was clearly adult. One was small. The third was something else, longer, thinner. The fingers stretched just a bit too far. Rylan emerged an hour later with his notes. He had translated a portion of the symbols. They formed no sentences, no instructions. They were names. Some matched the list of missing children. Others were unfamiliar, but one name stood alone, etched lower than the rest beneath a cracked portion of the wall. It was the only name written backward. Rylan flipped it in his notes and read it aloud. The room above them vibrated faintly. A glass on the kitchen counter tipped over and shattered. Meredith stood and whispered Emily's name. Alina asked Rylan to stop. He apologized and left soon after, his hand shaking slightly. That evening, Thomas placed the folded note on their kitchen table, the one they had found under the birthday hat. He stared at it for a long time, reading the words over and over. "I wait." He asked Meredith if she believed Emily was trapped behind the arched door. Meredith shook her head. She said Emily was in both places, in the house and beyond it, in the hallway and under the earth. She said the house was part of her now, that every board and nail had absorbed her breath. Thomas turned away, unsure whether to believe or fear her. That night, the hallway stretched again, this time without a door, just darkness. A long corridor that bent slightly to the right and disappeared into shadow. Alina set motion sensors at each end. The corridor remained visible for nearly an hour. During that time, the sensors triggered 5 times. No one entered. Nothing moved in the footage, but the readings suggested 5 distinct passes. The final activation occurred at 3:14 a.m. At that exact moment, the birthday cake in the cellar room lost 1 candle. It simply vanished. The frosting melted slightly in a perfect ring where the wax had stood. Alina checked the footage again and again. Nothing touched the cake. No wind, no animal, no hand. It was simply gone. The next morning, Meredith wore her wedding dress. She did not explain why. She simply entered the living room in the lace-trimmed fabric, barefoot and quiet, and sat near the rug. The fabric trailed behind her like fog. She placed her journal on the coffee table and asked Thomas to read the last page. It contained a drawing of the stairwell beneath the arched door. In the drawing, Meredith stood at the bottom. Emily faced her from the opposite wall. Between them, a mirror reflected the room, but in the reflection only the cake remained. No people, no symbols, just a perfectly lit table and 6 unburned candles. Alina took the drawing and compared it to photos from the cellar. The symbols had shifted. not in placement, in shape. Some had deepened, others faded. The wall beneath the backward name had cracked further. Behind it, a hollow space echoed slightly when tapped. Ryland returned with a small device used to measure acoustic response in stone. He confirmed that something sat behind that portion of the wall. Possibly a cavity, possibly another room. Thomas fetched a chisel. Alina did not stop him. He worked carefully for nearly 2 hours. With each strike, the air thickened. When the final stone came loose, a narrow passage was revealed, just wide enough to crawl through. Meredith volunteered. Alina insisted on leading, but Meredith placed her hand on Alina's shoulder and said that Emily would not show herself if anyone else entered first. Alina hesitated, then stepped aside. Meredith took a flashlight and her journal, then dropped to her knees and crawled into the darkness. The passage sloped gently upward. The air inside was dry and smelled faintly of roses. She crawled for nearly 20 feet before reaching another door. This one was small and wooden, the size of a cabinet panel. She opened it. Inside was a circular chamber, smaller than the last, a perfect sphere of smooth stone. In the center sat a glass case. Inside the case was Emily's birthday dress, pressed flat and framed. On the glass, written in condensation, were 3 words, "I am still." Meredith dropped her journal. It landed open, pages flipping. The room around her felt warmer. She stepped to the glass and touched it. The condensation vanished. Behind the dress, a shape began to form. A face. Pale, familiar, eyes wide, a child's smile curling upward. Meredith whispered her daughter's name. The smile deepened. The morning after Meredith entered the hidden chamber, the house fell completely silent. No hum from the walls. No vibrations beneath the floor. Even the vents stopped their faint whirring. It was not peace. It was suspension, a holding of breath. Thomas walked the halls in socks, careful not to disturb anything. He found Meredith asleep on the living room couch, the wedding dress draped around her like snow. Her face was calm. In her lap lay her journal, closed for the first time in days. He stood over her for a long time before kneeling and brushing a curl from her cheek. She stirred, but did not wake. He took the journal and set it beside the soil. That day, the floor held no handprints, only a single outline, a small shoe print pressed lightly into the rug, too small to be Meredith's, too defined to be from before. Alina arrived with backup that afternoon. The team had reviewed footage from the hallway corridor. The passage that stretched through the upper floor now remained visible at all hours. The sensors no longer triggered. It was as if whatever crossed the threshold no longer disrupted air or heat or time. Ryland stood in the kitchen with his arms crossed, staring at the symbols that had appeared faintly on the window. They looked like condensation, but remained even when wiped. The same open-mouthed symbol from the cellar had imprinted itself onto the glass. It faced inward. In the cellar, the birthday cake now held only 1 candle. The frosting had cracked slightly, though the cake remained unspoiled. Meredith came down after sunset and stood before it. She did not touch it. She did not speak. Instead, she walked to the framed drawings along the wall and removed the final one. The image of Emily in the chair no longer smiled. Her head tilted slightly downward. Her hands rested folded in her lap. Meredith carried the frame upstairs and placed it on the mantel above the fireplace. Thomas joined her silently. Together they stood until the sun disappeared completely and the house entered full shadow. That night the hallway door widened. It no longer led to the corridor. It opened into the full room. The same room Meredith had seen in dreams. The banner remained, the table, the candles, but no chairs, no dolls, no Emily. The air pulsed gently with warmth. Meredith stepped through the threshold and stood beside the table. The final candle remained unlit. She turned to Thomas and asked him to bring her the matchbox from the kitchen. He hesitated, then complied. When he returned, the table had shifted slightly. It now stood between them. Meredith struck the match and held the flame near the wick. Before she could lower the match, a voice spoke from the hallway behind them. It was small, gentle, not a whisper, Clear. It said, "Do not." Thomas turned immediately. Meredith froze. At the edge of the hallway stood a figure, small, barefoot, wearing a dress printed with sunflowers. Her hair was shorter than before. Her eyes were wide. She held the stuffed rabbit in her arms, one ear trailing to the floor. She looked directly at her mother and said, "Please wait." Meredith let the match burn out in her hand. The voice continued. The girl said, "Not like this. Not this way. I remember home. I remember love." Meredith stepped away from the table. Her breath came in short gasps now, and tears blurred her vision. She reached toward the girl, but the girl did not step forward. Instead, she pointed upward. Meredith turned and saw the ceiling of the room glowing faintly. The shape of the oak tree had been burned into the plaster. Its roots spread outward, and from each root hung a ribbon. A single ribbon hung low enough to reach. Meredith touched it. The moment her fingers closed around it, the entire house shuddered. The lights flickered once. The soil vanished from the rug. The windows cleared of symbols. The hallway returned to its original length. In the cellar, the cake dissolved into dust. The framed drawings turned blank. Every page of Meredith's journal whitened, the symbols erased. Only the cover remained marked. A single handprint pressed in faded red. In the upper hallway, the strange door closed silently and disappeared into the wall. Where it had been, only wallpaper remained. Faded flowers. A pattern they had chosen the year they moved in. Thomas stood with his arms around Meredith. She trembled slightly, but held herself upright. Across the room, the figure of Emily slowly stepped backward, becoming less defined with each step. She never cried. She never smiled. Her face remained calm. As she reached the edge of the frame, she looked once more at her parents and whispered thank you. Then she was gone. No wind, no light. Just absence. The house grew quiet again, not in a hollow way, not in fear. In rest. The air warmed slowly over the next hour. The rooms felt lighter. The floors softer. The light through the windows returned to normal. Alina came in from outside and stood in the foyer looking around. She said nothing. Rylan stood beside her, arms still crossed, staring into space. Thomas walked past them and went into the kitchen. He poured a glass of water and drank it slowly. Meredith sat on the couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She closed her eyes and breathed. That evening, Thomas removed the boards from the oak tree. He did it without ceremony, one nail at a time. The tree no longer hummed. It stood tall and still, the bark smooth and unbroken. Meredith joined him as the last nail came free. Together they stepped back and looked up into its branches. The leaves whispered in the breeze. No music, no voice, just wind, just light. Thomas took her hand and they walked inside together. In the weeks that followed, the town returned to normal. No new disappearances were reported. The old cases remained unresolved, but something had shifted. The mayor visited the Carters once. He brought flowers and offered a quiet apology. Meredith thanked him without bitterness. She spent her days writing, not in journals, in letters, to families of the missing, to mothers like her. She wrote not to explain, but to comfort. Her words never claimed certainty, only presence, only memory. Thomas worked on the house. He repainted the hallway. He replaced the cracked tiles in the kitchen. He planted roses near the base of the oak. Every evening he lit a single candle and placed it on the mantel. Not in mourning, in remembrance, for the moments between breaths, for the names etched in stone, for the voice that said, "I wait." If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more mystery narratives just like this. Let us know in the comments what you think really happened to Emily and where in the world you're watching from. Your thoughts help us uncover more stories waiting in the shadows.